Hi, this is Shane Starr, and today I'm doing something new, which is respond to a request off of one of my shorts where I asked any of my subscribers for ideas if they wanted me to talk about anything. I'd be happy to oblige, and so here I am. So this is from The Good, the Brad, and the Ugly. Thank you for your request, and let me read it out loud. I think one of the topics that is missing a great deal of exposure is the issue of high intelligence and how it affects very common types like ISTJs and ISFJs. I happen to be specifically interested in this since the intuitive dominated online sphere often glosses over um, these types. So they're looking for anecdotes, examples, how maybe smart types and less smart types are different, how they change, and how they appear when they're highly intelligent. So to help with this request, I'm going to be reading an article from idrlabs.com called On the Bias Against Sensation. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article, but I am going to read a couple paragraphs which will set us up for the rest of the discussion. So I know it's boring. I don't have the colorful graphs and stuff like that. Maybe someday, but right now at this level, I'm not doing it for exposure money. It's just something that I like to do. So sorry if it's not as exciting as some of the other videos, but here we go. Okay, so on the bias against sensation. If you've studied Jungian typology to any extent, you have no doubt noticed that the field is marred by a bias in favor of the intuitive types. Sensation types are commonly denigrated and abused, and the arguments often advanced in the so-called typology community is that any such intelligent person must not be an S-type because he or she is smart, ingenious, or academic and the like. They say that this comes from a couple of main sources. The first is Isabel Myers' group book, Gifts Differing, which also strikes the bias bell by lauding the intuitive types while passing over the sensor types with no great excitement. Another popular culprit is David Keirsey's Please Understand Me series, wherein intuitive types are basically described as synonymous with everything exciting, while the S or sensation types are described as little more than mindless worker drones. Little wonder then that actual ISTJs do not recognize themselves in most ISTJ descriptions. Compare Keirsey, for instance, his description of the INTJ as the rational mastermind compared to the ISTJ, the guardian inspector. We could flip this bias on its head and call the ISTJ the self-governed executive, which people could call the INTJ the insufferable crackpot. So, which one of these would you want to resonate with? So, as they go on to say, most modern sources in Jungian typology perpetuate this notion that intuitive types are cool and intelligent, while sensor types are stupid and boring. Yet, going back to Jung and his own studies, he repeatedly said that ST types, not NT even, are the default scientist or scientific type. He also thought, for instance, that Isaac Newton, one of the great pioneers of science, was a sensation type. And he made it clear that INTJs, in Jung's own view, were not necessarily logical masterminds. So that's the general idea. I have one more bit to read on this before I get into my own thoughts on what I'm reading. So what they go on to say is that IQ normally gets linked with intuitive types, and they bring up the fact that Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, and most, if not all, the serious people in typology put ESFP for him. So you can be intelligent and be a sensation type or sensing type. Um, I use sensation because that's what this article uses, and they make a good argument. If we could tell the difference between intuitive and sensing strictly based on IQ, in that set or state of affairs, we might as well type you based on an IQ test and forget all the typology questions. Just if you're smart above a certain level, you must be intuitive. If you're below that level, then you must be a sensor. But no one does that. And I think no one even claims to do that anymore, but the bias is still there. It's kind of like underneath, like a lot of people don't want to admit that they belong to a certain ideology, but deep down, we know there's more of them out there than they admit, things like that. So here are some of my own key takeaways from this discussion. And back to the original request, it's like, how do certain sensor types look when they are smart, when they are well read, and how does that look different? And in order to answer that question, I have to sort of back up and hold on. The first thing I would say is that there are smart and dumb people of every type. I'll have to use a fictional character of mine, but if you look on personality database, for instance, Patrick Star from SpongeBob, I don't think too many people would peg him as a intelligent being, but he is listed as an INTP. So I think, I'm not saying whether that's technically right or not. What I am saying, though, is that in the opinion of most people, that character is an INTP. And I think also in the opinion of most people, he wouldn't be smart. Now, are most INTP smart? Yes, but not necessarily. In the same vein, one of the smartest fictional characters in filmic history is Mr. Spock, both the classic Leonard Nimoy Mr. Spock and the newer one in the movies. They're both listed as ISTJs, not the INTJ, but ISTJ. So we have someone really smart being a sensor. And I think to really cut to the chase of our requester's question, what does a smart ISTJ look like? I'd say look no further than something close to Mr. Spock. Okay, and I think, on the other hand, I think smart INTPs would also resemble Mr. Spock as well. So I want to go a little deeper into another takeaway, and this, the other type that was asked about was ISFJ, and in order to answer that, I would just say, from personal experience, back in my past career as a teacher, one of the most intelligent people I knew was an ISFJ. Now, she wasn't very vocal. She wasn't very, charismatic. And she wasn't on anyone's list as the number one favorite teacher. Yet, she wasn't on anyone's hated list, and she wasn't definitely not in the bottom half of anyone's picks. And she was always the voice of reason in department meetings, and she was definitely an ISFJ. And she, just a very calming type of intelligence. And that leads me to my second big takeaway overall, which is there are different types of intelligence. Now, we all know this from a psychology viewpoint, but from a typology viewpoint, I don't think it's stressed enough. So I made some notes about how these different intellects look, and I just categorized them by function. So I've talked a lot about the underrating of lead FE types. That's ESFJs and ENFJs, and how even in business, even when it has to do with technical systems and programs, it almost always involves people to some extent. And on those lines, there's no one more crafty and ingenious than ESFJs and ENFJs. FE productivity and skill is a real thing, and it is a real intelligence, especially considering people like myself, where whether you agree with my own assessment about being FE polar in MBTI systems, or if it's just low FE, maybe in socionics or something, that's a real skill. Like people, I think that FE is the most intellect that is taken for granted by people. They don't see it as an intelligence, but it really is. Now, and like most types of intelligence, a little bit of it can be learned, but you never really get it if it's not high in your cognitive stack. This might be a hot take, but I would consider Jesus a prime example of a lead FE person. Now, I know all the websites list him as INFJ, but that's still high FE. I would simply make two arguments for Jesus being an ENFJ or even an ESFJ, and here they are. The first one is a little more serious, and what did he do for a living? Think about this. Yeah, he was a carpenter, but what did he actually do? What do the Bible Gospels tell us he did mostly? Mostly what he did was heal people. He was basically a doctor. If you bracket all the miraculous stuff and everything, and just consider what was his mission in life. Yeah, he talked, but his main thing was actually helping people, doing things for people, kind of Enneagram 2 type stuff, FE type stuff. Even in the talking, it's FE type stuff. Now, the second one's kind of more of a joke, but think about this. It's really true. What dude do you know in his 30s who has 12 friends to hang out with? I certainly don't. I mean, I don't know anyone who has that. And then again, look at what he did. He had crowds around him all the time. He had a crew of 12 people following him around all the time. That's FE intellect, and if Jesus is, as I believe, the legitimate Son of God, and you can make an argument that God himself values FE, but this video is not about that, so I'm not really trying to go there. Regular, more contemporary examples of this type of intelligence, I would say people who generate big movements. I would say, like Martin Luther King is an obvious one. I would say talk show hosts. Now, even though most people would say like someone like Joe Rogan is like a ESTP or ESFP maybe, it's that FE getting people together, driving people in a certain direction. I mean, one could argue that Joe Rogan had as much of an influence over the 2024 election as any human being on the planet, and perhaps more than Trump himself even. And just from having people on and having conversations with them, and you have to have some kind of good FE to talk to people for 3 hours at a time and keep it entertaining from beginning to end, So FE is a type of intelligence, and we think of intelligence in different terms like, X's and O's or decimal points, but no, that is a real type of intelligence. Moving on to SI type of intellect. This, I would say, is more of I would just say this is most in alignment with academic schoolwork, either high school work if you're young, or college collegiate work. I'm going to use a fictional character here, but I can relate to this character really well in a lot of ways, and that would be Hermione Granger. One of the reasons I relate to her is because she's on the cusp of ISTJ or ESTJ, and I can relate to that feeling as well. But it depends on who you ask and what website you're on. But just that type of an intellect, being able to organize schoolwork, write papers, organize arguments for papers. Now, some people argue there's some TE in there. Yes, I'll admit that. But it's that SI grounding and organization of material, outlining things, lists of things to do, in several of the books and movies, she has a list, how do you remember all this stuff? Well, she writes it down, she studies, she takes notes. That you can be really brilliant and not have the capacity for that type of work. Think of a high IQ ENTP Enneagram 7. They might have a higher IQ than a real life Hermione Granger, but they won't have the discipline and the fortitude to outlast her in a strictly academic setting. Now, they might drop out of school and go invent the mobile phone or something and make 100 times more money than Hermione will with her degrees and stuff. But again, that's a different skill set, and we'll get to that one later. The SI intelligence would be then, just academic organization, and maybe it spreads beyond strict academics. Next, NE, and I would say that's the innovative type of intelligence. That is the creative. There's something to be said, and it's not always in a technical realm, although it can be. These are people, I would say, the classic example of NE intelligence would be, someone like Socrates, questioning, arguing people in circles, or Machiavelli with his political discourse, The Prince. In recent culture, to take it away from philosophy or politics, I would say Robert Downey Jr. is an excellent example of a lead NE. Very witty, very quick with the tongue, very sharp with retorts and comebacks. They can just think of a joke or an answer just like that. Like that is a certain type of intellect. You can be very intelligent but slow in this area, and someone like Robert Downey Jr. can run circles around them in a debate because they're quicker. NE is like quick thinking intelligence, and innovative as well, and creative. So when the idea I'm trying to get across here is being super high in any of these intelligences does not preclude being high also in other areas, nor does it preclude you being low in other areas either. I'm just saying, whatever your lead function is, you can relate with one of these examples. Moving on to SE, I'm going to take more of a socionics definition of SE in this video here, and think of it as power dynamics. And I think obviously the classic great example of this would be Alexander the Great, and the contemporary one, not to compare these two leaders, but it's obvious with what President-elect Trump has been able to do with his political journey. Whether you love him or hate him, it's been a remarkable journey, and you have to say he's a master at this kind of maneuvering in political hierarchies. And so SE, that takes a type of intelligence. And someone could say, no, that doesn't take intelligence, that just takes boldness, or a devil may care attitude or something like that. But those types of attitudes I think they are a type of intellect. Try generating that attitude if you don't have it naturally, and see how that works out for you. It probably won't, especially in power dynamics, whether it's political power or relationship power, or if it comes to this, physical power. Um, it's a type of innate ability which I would compare with our definition of intelligence, but it's an innate mental capacity, because some people can be bold. I mean, take Trump, for instance. He's 78 years old. And um, so, when you think of someone like that, you can take the physical out of it, but he still has it, so um, there is a mental component to even SE power, because you could be physically able and still lack that attitude and not be a good fighter or struggler in the political or office dynamics realm. So it's not synonymous with physical ability, although there's a lot of overlap there. What I'm trying to get at here is that SE intelligence is just that. It's also a type of intellect that's very formidable, especially if you have to go against it. Okay, next, TI, introverted thinking. This is what most people think of when they think of regular old-fashioned intelligence. The classic examples, we could go back as far as we want and give lists, but for me as a Catholic, Thomas Aquinas as my patron saint would be a great example with his brilliance and intellect. Summa Theologica is one of the greatest philosophical works in Western civilization, and many of his arguments still stand today, in my opinion. Moving up, we can look at Einstein. To go even more contemporary than Einstein, we could look at Stephen Hawking. Now, I know some people want to make him an INTJ. I disagree with that assessment. And I know a lot about him, having studied him in grad school. Also, I would say Steve Jobs. Now, I know some people want to give him, ENTJ. I would type Steve Jobs as an ISTP, along with several other people too. TI, that mechanical intelligence. Now, for regular TI people, it would be people who are good with mechanics. That could be fixing a computer, fixing a car engine, being able to work through a systematic program on your iPhone. These are people who understand systems, and they know how to analyze systems to find problems and also find solutions to those problems. So this one doesn't really need an argument for why it's intellect. I think 99.9% of people out there, including anyone watching this video, would agree that TI is probably the easiest, most recognizable form of intellect, and no one's going to argue whether it is or not, like they might for SE or SI or FE for that example. Okay, next up we have introverted intuition, we'll say. And I think this kind of intellect is like deeper understandings of humanity and meaning and of the human race. Now, this time I'm taking a more MBTI approach rather than a sociotics approach, but I think we could throw time in there as well. I'm thinking of great authors and philosophers like Dostoevsky, Carl Jung himself, Nietzsche, Karl Marx, for instance. Even though Marx is distasteful to me personally, I would still recognize him as a great thinker. So introverted intuition, there's a certain intellect there that is really broad in terms of understanding what it's all about, the meaning of life, and being able to express that in an artistic way, in a symbolic way, that no matter how brilliant you might be as a TI lead or FE or NE lead even, you're not going to be able to hold a candle to these people in terms of that type of intuitive intelligence. Maybe extrovert intuition people can sort of get it, but they would be the ones to understand more fully the philosophical and theoretical bits of knowledge that the NI people are not only understanding but actually producing. So to me, introverted intuition is its own type of intelligence. And because there's such a bias towards introverted intuition, I don't expect to hear many arguments against that type of intellect. I think most people liking it, and so many people self-type as introverted intuition leads. I think they'll be happy to hear that they have their own set of intelligence. Moving on, last two, starting with FI. I think FI might be the difficult one out of all 8 functions to argue that it's a type of intelligence. But when we think of the socionics version of FI especially, when we think of interpersonal relations and the understanding of values, like being able to recognize whether a moral judgment is correct or incorrect, that has its own kind of systematic hierarchy, and I think it has its own intelligence. Like take someone like Thanos in the MCU, who has a completely reasonable approach of eliminating half the life in the universe so that the other half can thrive. It's the high FI types that can say, no, this is absolutely wrong. Whereas people with FI low in their stack, they're going to be like, why? That sounds good to me. It seems to work, Even a brilliant TI scientist might say with a cold touch, like, yeah, I agree with Thanos. That seems like the most logical way to go. It takes a lead FI or someone with FI high in their stack to be able to go against that other kind of intelligence with value-based intelligence, being able to intuitively almost understand what is a better or worse choice when it comes to ethics and morality, and even value judgment as it relates to beauty. I think FI types have the type of intelligence to discern between a masterpiece work of art and a cheap imitation, whereas someone who might be brilliant in a different type of intelligence, say SE or TI, they might like the fake version better for some odd reason. It's the FI people who have that brilliance in being able to perceive those little nuances as it relates to immeasurable things, love, hate, beauty, ugliness, those types of things. People with this kind of high intelligence would be, a couple of my favorite philosophers and writers. We have Kierkegaard, Camus, George Orwell, a great writer for our time, even though he was before his time. Shakespeare. I mean, you can't get any better than Shakespeare in terms of understanding the importance of these passions we have, and that's an intellect unto itself. I mean, in fact, a lot of typology tests ask, whose intellect would you rather have, Einstein's or Shakespeare's? And that question itself bears witness to the fact that Shakespeare's kind of intellect is indeed a type of intellect. It's not just feelings. There's an intellect inherent in that. I would also say great artists in our history would also have high FI. Starting with people like Elvis Presley, for instance. He's usually coined as a ESFP, or some people would say ISFP. Michael Jackson, people like that, with really high sensitivities, musical talent, artistic talent, talent that's not as easy to quantify on a test, but it's there nonetheless. So FI is also a type of intelligence. Last but not least, TE. And I think this is just regular, plain office work, executive type of intelligence. Think, managers, CEOs. These might not be your most exciting, personalities, but they are there. I would say most politicians are either lead TE or have high TE. You might say, well, what about Trump? Well, in socionics, if he is an SLE, then he has TE as his demo function, which puts at his equal strength to his lead function. So it's there in him too. Also, notwithstanding, some people type him as ENTJ. I don't, but just throwing that out there. TE is very good with politics. Now, so is FE, but we've already dealt with that earlier in the video. So I would say, people with high TE would be, in history, a lot of bad guys, Stalin. More recently, we could say, I notice on IDR Labs, Hillary Clinton's ranked as a ESTJ, Ben Shapiro. Again, most politicians or political pundits will be this type. And I think TE is more of like a common sense intelligence, not as theoretical as TI, of course, but it's there. It's practical intelligence. It's being able to start a new job and maybe a new profession, and you get your first sit in front of the computer. It's like, hey, have you ever worked with Salesforce before? And someone who maybe hasn't still picks it up really quick. To me, that's TE intelligence. Whereas someone else, say a lead NI with brilliant insights to the human race, they could sit in front of that same computer and go, Salesforce, like, dude, I could write you a 20-page essay on 20th century existentialism, but I can't get how Salesforce works. Every time I push enter, it takes me back to the past screen. I don't get it, Sorry, I need your help. But TE leads, they'll pick it up quick. They can find workarounds when the system breaks down. They know how to make things work again, even if it's a second string option or something. TE people are good at taking in the facts and working off those facts and not getting distracted off the bottom line. Great with numbers, budgeting. And there's also some overlap there with the SI intelligence as far as being organized. So again, to wrap things up, my takeaways from this that I want to share is that there are smart and dumb people of every type. And each of us has a combination particular to ourselves, but measurable enough to where you can kind of look at your lead function, your creative function, which is the second spot, and then your demo function if you're using socionics as well. And you can kind of say, what intelligence do I have? And also, which kind of intelligence might I lack? And there will be different degrees of strength and weakness in all of those. Overall successful, well-rounded, brilliant person might be smarter with their tertiary intelligence than you are with a lead of that same function in your intellect. So it can be tricky, but I think if we stick with our lead function, we can kind of zero in on, what am I best at? And, just ask yourself, what kind of intelligence do I have? And then you can just roll with that. Anyway, that's all I got today. Tomorrow I'm going to come out with a video of my favorite websites for, not websites, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to come out with a video on my favorite YouTube channels for typology, and that will include MBTI, Enneagram and Socionics. That's it. If you stayed this long, thank you. I'm out.